Let me once again welcome you for the second exhilarating day continued from yesterday. Yesterday is past and present starts for future. Without wasting your time, I would like to invite Dr. Bruce Goldberg to enthrall us with his depth of experiences and knowledge. Thank you.
But here's a famous quote from Lao Tse, the 6th century BC Chinese philosopher. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. Okay? And you notice how he progresses from the cognitive to the spiritual. So just intelligence is not enough. You can be an intelligent neurotic, okay? And intelligence doesn't necessarily win you the right ticket. In America, we have an expression, you can be dead right on the freeway. You're in the right lane, but somebody crossed the lane and hit you head on and killed you, okay? So knowledge is not, knowledge can be power on certain levels, but it's not spiritual power, okay? Here's another example of a quote that, this is something I wrote years ago, and I represent psychic empowerment, so I believe in taking charge of your life, overcoming fear. The problem when you're empowered, and that means you're going to be successful in life, is you're going to generate a lot of jealousies. People who don't have things usually don't like people who do. We have what's called the have and have not society. So I don't want that to disturb you or to interfere with your ability to empower yourself. I believe in win-win-win situations. There's nothing wrong with attaining abundance. It's how you do it and how you keep it that counts. So if you do something that's positive and successful and abundance-oriented, and the public benefits by it, who loses? Nobody, okay? You can be a cold, ruthless Donald Trump robber baron and do it that way too, and that I don't recommend. But just a couple of points about empowerment and removing the fear. Remember, fear is the only lesson we have to learn karmically. You remove fear, you ascend. If not, you keep coming back. If you are well-meaning and honest, people may try to take advantage of you. Be well-meaning and honest anyway. If you are empowered and fulfilled, people may be jealous. Be empowered and fulfilled anyway. People may act in a selfish, illogical, and unreasonable manner. Forgive them and always send out love. Your life's work, both personally and professionally, may be destroyed overnight. Continue to build and prosper anyway. Even though your motives may be pure and spiritual, people may accuse you of ulterior motives. Be pure and spiritual anyway. The more you succeed in life, the greater the likelihood that people will be jealous and act as your enemy. Succeed anyway. Your best efforts will often be ignored. Give the world the best you've got anyway. And I think that sums up pretty much what I represent. This is not arrogance, this is not conceit. You don't brag about things and throw things in people's faces, but you don't let other people's mentalities disturb you or to distract you from your goal.
When I thought of sanctuary, it appears to be like a forest, and later on I invited all my family members and worked out in a very specific manner. Later on I could see the abundance aspect of my life, okay. Everything working well. So later when you ask to go to your higher self and become part of it, I could really feel the magnanimity of my higher self totally. Then when you ask to visualize the later life, next life, how you are taking, I felt that I don't have any body, so not coming onto the earth. Just it's a very wonderful land where I am totally light itself with the bluey stars, a very beautiful world, and experiencing the oneness with the whole creation and a ramification of myself in a very greatest way. And I was totally in that, and I could feel you also belong to that consciousness. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Now, here's a couple of recommendations. First, in reference to your family, everybody has certain little problems with the family, and it's nice to use the sanctuary to work it out. So don't be surprised if your wife and children may act a little differently in the future. But if your wife, for example, doesn't say, "Hun, you didn't do that in my sanctuary, what's the problem?" Okay. Okay. Now, as far as the what you were describing also was an ascension mentality, being pure light and the beauty. And you notice how that felt like unconditional love, right? It was like, you can't describe that experience. It's ecstatic. It's what they call ecstasy. The shamans would use that term. The journeys of ecstasies, they would call that. And that's beautiful. And really, if that means you're going to ascend after this life, more power to you, okay? But don't give me the credit for that. That's your doing this. Remember, the ascension is the only thing that really counts. When people tell me, like they'll say, you know, in Los Angeles, they say, America is a very materialistic country, and Los Angeles is one of the most materialistic cities. I mean, people do things that you don't even want to know about, okay? Anything for money, or power, or influence. And not everybody's like that, but there's a lot of people there who come there who are very superficial. Well, when you ask a Los Angeles citizen, and many Americans, not just Los Angeles, but definitely LA, if you ask them, create the perfect life, you know what they'll say? Oh man, I want to have a big house in Bel Air, California, Beverly Hills or whatever. I want to have a big pool. I want to have 18 women serving me, tickling my feet, you know, whatever. I want to have power. I want to be a superstar. I want the media to come to me, the paparazzi. And I said, you know, you're not getting it, okay? Because that's not the ultimate. That may be materialistic, but number one, if you've got that kind of money, people are going to be trying to steal it from you, all right? You're going to get women who are attracted to you because they are gold diggers, or LA bimbos as we call them. You're going to have the government coming after you for taxes, you know? So you can create all the materialism you want. This is not the dimension you want to live on, all right? There are too many problems. You've got diseases, you've got terrorism, you've got earthquakes, you've got governments doing their thing, you've got everybody doing their thing. So my point is that the ultimate environment is not that. The ultimate environment is to shed the physical body and rejoin the God energy complex and not worry about materialism or anything else. That's the ultimate. We're here to ascend. We're not here just to pay the bills, pay mortgages, raise kids. Do that. That's part of your karmic cycle that you chose for in the earth plane. And I'm not saying ignore your responsibilities, no. I don't recommend people live under a freeway ramp and read Plato all day long, or the Vedas. No, you have things to do, but you don't want to compromise your spirituality. That's the difference. And the spiritual aspect is, see, that's one of the reasons why you can do things like abundance. I call this Karmic Capitalism, my cute little name. Mean that you attain abundance, the capitalism part, by growing spiritually. That's the karmic part. And the universe gives you the opportunity to do that, you know? Let me give you an example of some karmic capitalism. This is a good example. This is one of my patients. I used to do a radio show in the East Coast many years ago, and a patient, my producer was told by me, now this is a major show, this was like a major affiliate, and we used to get calls from about 15 different states, because the signal at night on AM radio goes out all over the place. And even though it was in Baltimore, we used to get calls from Canada and Bermuda and North Carolina, all kinds of places. So I told my producer, I said, look, I don't want you to screen the calls. I want you to let anybody call on the air. You can always cut them off if they're a jerk. But I don't want to be prejudiced here. I don't want to just look at the good calls. So he says, okay, doctor, I'll let anybody, you know, whatever, no problem. So one fine night, this was an overnight radio show, and I had a patient several years before that who had this very unusual voice. Now, you ever notice if you watch Hollywood films or Bollywood or Collywood or whatever the other Hollywoods are, you ever watch an actor from the old days who maybe he's dead now, maybe it's you know, John Wayne or whatever it is? You notice how the voice never changes? The body changes, right? They get old and fat and gray maybe, but the voice is always the same. The voice simply doesn't change when you're an adult. So this gentleman had one of those strange, identifying, unique voices. So when he says, doctor, we have a call from so-and-so, he called from somewhere in Maryland, and I said, okay, put him on, and he says, Dr. Goldberg, my name is, and I said, I knew exactly who it was. It was a former patient. And I said, how do you do? And he says, I'm one of your former patients. I said, yes, I know who you are. And I said, so what can I do for you? He says, I would like to share something with your audience. Now that is either very good or very bad, right? So I said, being empowered and having no fear, and knowing that I work with this man very successfully, he's a very good patient, I said, please share your experience. And he says, okay. So he says, when I saw Dr. Goldberg about 5 years ago, I used to work for General Motors in the automobile plant. He was a blue-collar worker. And he was injured on the job. And he was retired by workman's compensation on disability because he got hurt real bad. So he came to me and he said, doctor, he says, my life is a mess. He says, physically I have problems. He says, I no longer have a job because I can't work anymore, you know. And he says, my wife doesn't respect me anymore, makes fun of me. He had 2 teenage kids who just were doing what teenagers usually do, especially in America, okay? So he says, I don't have a future. I don't know what to do. He says, I'm really depressed and what can I do? And I says, well, what would you like to do? He says, well, you know, doctor, he says, I would like to actually establish a little business. Now, this is about over 35 years ago, so you understand, the numbers are very different today. So I said, okay, well, what's stopping you from doing this business? He says, well, I need to have a certain grub stake of a money issue. I need to get $5,000, and I don't have that money. But if I had $5,000, I'd be able to establish this business. And I said, well, why don't we work on some karmic capitalism, okay? So now he's sharing the story. He says, so I did your techniques, and this is where it became a problem. A good solution, but a bad problem. You'll see why. So he said, I use your age progression techniques, and I decide to go into the future, and I decide to pick a Maryland State lottery number, and I won exactly $5,000, exactly the amount of money I needed for my business. I then established this business, and over the last couple of years, it's been very successful. I'm not rich and famous, but it's very successful. I now can support myself. My wife now respects me, and even my teenage kids are acting differently. Now, of course, they're in their 20s. And I said, you know something, that's a beautiful story. There's only one problem with your story. And he said, what's that? And I said, I would have rather you told me that off the air. He says, but doctor, he says, I love your work and I want people to know what you do. And I said, this is Saturday evening, Sunday morning. Do you know what's going to happen on Monday morning? Have you any idea the kind of calls I'm going to get? I'm going to get every racing tout, every stock investor, every person in the world who wants to use these techniques just for their own grubby materialistic needs, and it's not going to be fun. And he said, well, I just wanted to share. I said, listen, thank you very much, God bless you. And sure enough, Monday morning, you don't even want to know the calls that I got. Now, the universe didn't make him a millionaire. He didn't win some super lotto. He won just the amount of money he needed to establish his business. So don't think you can use progression just to become live an easy life by winning $1 gazillion somewhere. It doesn't quite work that way. But it does help you when the universe feels it's necessary, or when you've earned that. And this gentleman obviously earned that. He was able to use karmic capitalism to attain abundance, enough to help him do his thing. So that's an example of how you can do it. The point is that people get hung up on materialism. Don't. I'm not saying ignore your responsibilities, but what I'm saying is that if you do it at the compromise of your moral ethical code, you are failing a big test. And you may win on the short run, but in the long run, the universe is perfect. We're imperfect. Don't blame the universe. Karmic laws are perfectly just. You don't get out of the cycle until the karmic balance is zero, right? So, people who look at the entertainers, look at the Donald Trumps, look at people like that, the robber baron types. They are rich and famous, but do you ever see what Donald Trump looks like on television? It looks like he's wearing a squirrel on his head. I mean, the guy is not a happy camper, okay? And he's always got an angry look. And I work with very successful people. I have billionaires who are patients. I also have average people. Most of my patients are average middle-class people. But I have very wealthy people. I have celebrities of entertainment, of sports, of politics. And they're not coming to me to brag about how good they are. They're coming to me because they got problems. And many of them have big problems. They're depressed, they're suicidal, they're using all kinds of drugs and codependencies of all kinds. Materialism is not the answer. I don't object to people being successful. Again, it's how you get there and how you keep it that counts. Okay? So the universe, remember, knows what it's doing. We fail the test. Never blame the universe. You ever notice when people have problems, they always say, it's God's will, or, they blame somebody else. It's not my fault, Yes, it is. Okay? If you pass karmic tests, if you learn the lessons and grow spiritually, you won't have those problems. They're only challenges. It's like there's an old expression, one door closes, one door opens, right? Same thing applies here. even though you have what you think is a setback. If it wasn't for that setback, you wouldn't have made another choice. And that choice sometimes becomes extreme. Some people change their careers. Look at me. I was trained as a dentist. When I was in dental school, I didn't think of doing this. If you told me I was going to do this, I would say, change your brand of pot, okay? It's not going to happen. Today is the opposite of what we did yesterday, in the sense that instead of going into past lives, we're going to be going into the future. Okay, can we please settle down in the back? Shh. Settle down, please. Okay. So today is going to be the future. Now, we're going to do more than just going into the future of this life, which I call age progression, and going into a future life or two, which I call future life progression. We're going to be doing those exercises in the afternoon, yes. But we're going to be discussing some other things too. One is which we're going to be discussing how you can use the technique of going into the future, age progression, to actually slow down the aging process. That's going to be a hypnotic exercise we're going to be doing before we do the new you technique of selecting your ideal path. So that's another kind of interesting thing. And the other aspect is that we're going to be also talking about future technology. I will be discussing in my book, Time Travel from Our Future, which is available here, and my Egypt book, which is subtitled An Extraterrestrial and Time Traveler Experiment, I talk about future technology. We're going to be talking about the future technology of the next 20 years that my patients have given me in age progressions, and then we're going to talk about the technology of the 35th century. Let me just tell you, let's make a quick reference. This is kind of fun. This is teleportation. Many years ago, I was on the East Coast. I used to live and practice in Baltimore, Maryland. And let me just tell you, Baltimore, Maryland does not have tropical climate, okay? So fast forward back to the year 1985. It's between Christmas and New Year's. It's around December 28th, give or take. It's a Sunday. It's very cold. In Baltimore, it didn't snow that much there, but it was like 12 degrees centigrade, Fahrenheit, I say. And it was cold, and I was bored, and I hate the winter. I'm a warm weather person, which is why I live in Los Angeles. So in those days, I had 3 dogs, Karma, Phoenix, and Alpha, okay? You'll see why they're relevant in a moment. And it's the late morning, and you know, they have like football playoff games that are on. I said, I want to get out of here. I want to go where it's sunny. But I couldn't do that because I had patients coming in from out of town on Monday morning, right? So what do? I figure, why don't I just try teleportation? The best vacation I ever had was going to Montego Bay, Jamaica, which I did in 1977, 8 years before. And I remember that vacation. It's a beautiful island in the Caribbean. So I figured, let me see if I can go there. So remember, if you're going to teleport, it's your body that goes, right? So here I am. My dogs are watching me. You have to understand. These are miniature schnauzers, okay? They're smart dogs. And they're watching me, and I'm in my bathing suit. Now it's December 28th, okay? I've got my beach towel. I got my little slippers, my little copper tone, my little radio, and I'm lying on the couch, and my dogs are giving me that cockhead look, like, what's he doing, And the next thing I know is I'm on the beach. It's Montego Bay, and it's in the afternoon, and it's an isolated part of the beach, and there's this girl, she's probably around her early 20s, this brunette, lying on a beach towel. And she's about maybe 50 feet away from me. So I walk over, and she looks at me and she goes, where did you come from? This place has been isolated. Now, if you know when you're on the beach, you can't run fast on sand, And she didn't know how I got there so fast. And I said, well, I just moved pretty quickly. I said, do you mind if I put my towel down? And she goes, yeah, so we're talking, And we go swimming, we're talking, and she goes, are you going to be here very long? And I said, my flight leaves relatively soon. So she goes, well, if you're going to hang around, I go to this part of the beach every day. If you're here tomorrow, just come here, and I said, okay. So the next thing I know, I'm back on the couch in Baltimore, right? Now, I tell this story to people, and they say, oh, doctor, how do you know it wasn't some visual imagery or some out-of-body experience maybe, but why a teleportation? Well, I've done a lot of techniques in hypnosis, everything you can possibly imagine. Teleportation is the most difficult technique. There's a couple of things you cannot do with hypnosis. It's impossible. One, I went to the mirror in my living room, I had this full-length mirror, and I had a suntan. You can't do that with hypnosis. okay? In Baltimore, on December 28th, you don't get suntans, right? Not unless you go to a suntanning place, right? Secondly, my bathing suit was wet, and I had sand in my sneakers. Okay, you don't get that in Baltimore either, okay? Not where I lived. So what happened? Well, that's pretty physical evidence to teleportation. Teleportation has been documented over the years, over the centuries, and in my Exploring the Fifth Dimension book, I detail, and the Time Travels book, I give you real cases of teleportation. The most famous documented case of teleportation I will describe because it deals with areas not too far from here logistically. Let's go back to October 23rd, 1593. Mexico City. In the plaza in Mexico City, I have to understand in those days, Spain owned Mexico and Manila, Philippines, and Cuba and Puerto Rico, right? That was the Spanish colonial empire. And so Mexico had their own form of government. They had their own uniforms and guns that were unique to Mexico. They didn't have the Spanish type. The Spanish continental uniforms and guns were very different. That's important to know. So you're in the Mexico Plaza, City Plaza, the Capitol and everything, and all of a sudden this soldier, this Spanish-looking soldier, appears out of nowhere in the middle of the plaza. He's got a Spanish outfit on, and he's got a Spanish gun, right? And he's not Spanish, you'll see, he's actually Filipino. And they come, who are you? He says, the guy's nervous, he goes, I tried to save, the governor was murdered, it wasn't my fault, I tried to help him, but I couldn't do it. And they said, what governor? And they said, the governor of Philippines, And they said, man, you're loco, man. So they put him in jail. They thought he was crazy. Now the reason why it's important is because they had the local priest come to do an exorcism. So now the Catholic Church documents this case. And of course the local authorities, the historians documented the case. Now, he says he's from Manila. He was the guard of the governor, and the governor was murdered. And this was October 23rd, 1593. So they put him in jail, and every 2 months, what happened, Spain, in their colonial mentality, would send their ships around to their various, colonies, right? So to go from Manila, Philippines to Mexico took about 2 months by ship. They didn't have Learjets in those days. So around Christmas time is when the ship comes. They bring supplies, and they also bring the news. That's how they got their news. They didn't have CNN in those days. So the ship comes in, and guy comes in, they have their crew, and they're delivering their supplies. And one of the authority guys says, we got this guy in jail, and he says he was a guard to the governor. And he says, oh, the governor, he was murdered. And they said, really? When was that? October 23rd. And he said, really? So can you come to the jail, talk to this guy? So he comes to the jail, and he says, he's one of the guards. I saw him that morning. So here's an eyewitness to this guy, all right, who was guarding the governor, and then, boom, he's in Mexico Plaza. You don't do that in 1593 in a matter of a few minutes. So that is the most documented case of teleportation, documented by the historians and the Catholic Church. Okay? Interesting. All right, that's teleportation. It's a fun thing. Very difficult, but it's a very spiritual technique. The yogis, the very advanced spiritual people in this country, etc., and others, the more spiritually you are, the masters, right, and the gurus, don't they do things like levitation and teleportation and out-of-body travel? Isn't that one of the fringe benefits of being very spiritual? Okay. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about the idea of a time concept. Can we get the PDF file, please? When I mentioned parallel universes, I do have to make one reference here. This may be a little technically complicated, but have people here, have you guys ever heard of, are you familiar with the string theory of quantum physics? Have you heard that term before? They talk about different dimensions. It's called the string theory. It's very advanced physics, and it documents obviously time travel. But here's an interesting thing, and this relates to your country. A man named Srinivasa Ramanujan in around 1914 was a brilliant mathematician in India. He was eventually brought to England, and he was the one who came up with the concepts of different dimensions. 10 dimensions if these little strings vibrate clockwise, 26 dimensions if they vibrate counterclockwise. At first, his work was laughed at by the British. they were a little bit arrogant about him. You know, he was Indian. He couldn't possibly be smarter than their guys, right? And they were wrong. He was a brilliant guy. He lived in England for several years and then came back. He died at a young age. I think he was like 30 or something when he died. Brilliant, brilliant man. If you want to look him up, Saranabasa Ramanujan. But he is actually the basis of the string theory. Okay? So, interesting concept. Okay, now, I did this, let me hit the pointer here. I just want to review this, a couple of things. I'm not going to go through everything today, but I just want to go back. Could you scroll down, please? Okay, this is, stop right there. This is age progression, and when we deal with that, that's the new you technique. And that means going into the future of this life and the parallel universes or paths and selecting your ideal path. That's called, I call that the new you technique. And keep going again, oh yeah, we're fine. And future life progression, of course, going into future lives. And remember the concept, just keep it in mind, forbidden knowledge. Forbidden knowledge means that if you don't get certain information about the future, it's because you're not supposed to have it. You're not spiritually ready for that information yet. When you are, your higher self will give it to you. So you don't want to argue with your higher self. It does know a little bit more than you and I. All right, now this is we talked about the, scroll down please. This is the simultaneous time or the space-time continuum coming up from the Einstein's equations. You know, Einstein's theory of relativity is a really brilliant mathematical depiction. He didn't get the Nobel Prize for that, as I mentioned yesterday. He got it for the photoelectric effect. But if you do the string theory, it's called the superstring theory, the string theory, there's 5 different string theories, and today there's the M1 theory, which combines all the string theories together. If you do the math on the very advanced string theory, you know what comes out of it? The theory of relativity. So Einstein his work was part of a much bigger idea. Okay, all right. So people say, what about, you know, parallel universes and all this kind of stuff? Okay, you can lose it. It doesn't make sense. Well, there was a magazine that's been out for 150 years called Scientific American. I'm sure you've probably heard of it. It's a lay publication, but it's very detailed. If you don't have a good science background, you probably won't understand most of the articles. So Scientific American, like every other magazine, what they do is they have a feature article, a story in the cover, and they have a feature article like any other magazine. August issue of the year 2000, and I recommend that if you want to read about this, this is the scientific, really, really thick glass scientists, you know, guys who really know what they're doing. These are all experts in mathematics and physics. The feature story in August 2000 issue of Scientific American was on parallel universes. Pages 62 to 69 of that issue was the feature article documenting the current acceptance of parallel universes. And it's accepted. The mathematics cannot be argued. The closest sister universe to us today is less than a millimeter away. That's how close it is. So close yet so far. You don't know that. You can't see that parallel universe. You know what? You know how long a millimeter is? It's like a 40th of an inch. That's how close the closest sister universe is. So if you want to read about parallel universes on a more scientific level, a detailed level with academic backup, I'd recommend that particular issue of Scientific American. Okay, now dealing with progression, I want to just give an example of when I discovered progression going into the future in 1977 in Future Life Progression. Let me show you how you can test something and have an interesting experience. I wanted to test age progression going into the future of this life, right? Now, you've probably heard of a term like deja vu. People talk about deja vu, which is a really outdated term. Deja vu means you walk into a room and you recognize maybe the carpet